Courtney, can you tell us more about what work you've been doing currently at Cognite?
Yeah, of course. So this is, I don't have the case study up on my
Oh,
website yet,
sure.
but
Yeah.
I have all the design files here, so I can just show some of them here. At Cognite, I worked on Asset Data Insight, which is a technical platform for oil and gas engineers. And how they use it is that they input their data, which is usually in the form of time series, and they manipulate the data to show them meaningful results so that they can do work on, let's say, certain pipes if they're realizing that there's like an issue last month, that they can make these optimization changes in the actual oil rig. So one of the big projects I had was for thresholds, once it loads. This was very interesting because I messed up many times. We tried to leverage, at least I tried to leverage in the entire process, different design theory that would make the application better and the interactions better. So I wanted it to be fast, but visually give visual feedback and to help the user learn through the process so that they can work with it, because it is a bit of a complex concept. So this is how the time series looks. You would add in data different time series and they would be associated to certain types of equipment. And then you would have to be able to apply a threshold. So thresholding can be quite complex. You can have a very simple traffic light system where it's just a red, yellow, green section. You can have bandwidths where it's like top and bottom, middle section, or you can even just have in scatter plots a square on the page that's the threshold. So seeing how these different thresholds would be applied can be quite complex because you have to have someone to understand what the threshold means and how the threshold will interact with the chart, but also be able to apply it so that it's exact. The first stab of it was quite clunky. We had this setup where you would select the plot. In this case, it's on a scatter plot, so you select this plot. You would select the line type and then threshold value, and there was just a lot of clicking and a lot of drop downs and a lot of like different options that you can have, which are all necessary, right? So because it's so complex, we wanted to make sure that each field that you're inputting was very clear to the user, that they weren't confused as to how to change something. So splitting it up in these 4 steps was like exactly what we thought we wanted because these users needed to understand. But as we talked to some of our end users, they're putting thresholds on hundreds of charts, each chart with a couple thresholds. So you're doing this multiple times, and having 4 different steps is a bit cumbersome. And then additionally, as threshold gets more complex, having something very clunky requires for more scrolling and more reading and more understanding. So this will be very heavy cognitively.
Right.
So having to scrap this, we tried something a little bit more succinct. So this is more similar to how things would look in like Excel. You would define certain items, like if it's a red region, above, below, in between, and then just a marker of where it would land. And then also, of course, having the necessary visual feedback on the chart will help users understand what's happening.
Right.
And then in terms of thresholds, we also have to think about the interactions with the chart. So of course, as you would drag the handle up and down, things need to change correspondingly on like the side panel. So doing these smaller interactions are very important, and just figuring out how things would lay out on a very complex screen like this can be a bit tough. So moving on, after this project, we had this concept of convergence of charts. So charts is something I think I became very passionate about over the last 8 months maybe. And I say that because there's just so much you can do with charts.
Yeah.
So things we were looking at that weren't exactly apparent at the beginning were how things are grouped and how things will change when you shift them to a scatter plot. So this brought up a lot of edge cases that it's very hard to see when you're not an experienced designer. And my mentor helped me extremely when it came to pinpointing these smaller edge cases. So certain things like you have a plot group which are related. And as you turn into a scatter plot, one is randomly selected, usually the first one, as your x-axis, and then the rest of the data is interpolated for the y-axis. But if you have a plot group that is just a solo axis, then you would have a empty scatter plot. So these different inputs and corresponding outputs is very important to think about. And I think just like this project made me more interested in design. Prior to this, I felt a little bit stuck in what I was doing and I wasn't too satisfied with the work I've been doing. I was a bit bored, and I think like exploring a more technical product, a product I don't think anyone or even would think about designing usually in terms of when you start out in UI UX. It was a lot of fun, and I think like after doing this project, I want to continue in a more technical design field and working in projects like this.
Nice, absolutely. Because a lot of people who will be watching this, they might not understand this because many of them might not have the technical background or the knowledge about data analytics
Mm-hmm.
and AI and a lot of other
And I
factors.
think you don't need you don't need to be scared about not having that uh, knowledge. I definitely don't have this knowledge. We touch on it a little bit in engineering, pump pressure curves, stuff like that. But I was a bit shocked at how things in school are actually being applied. And as we were doing this project, I was like, oh, this kind of makes sense. And a lot of things that didn't make sense, you just have to learn. You just have to do some research, talk to some people, and try it out.
Nice.